Hello and welcome to the Federal. Today we have with us Mr. Razdan, former Union Power Secretary, who is here to shed light on the prevailing power crisis in the country and the coal shortage that is behind this crisis. Thank you, Mr. Razdan, for joining us. Why is it that the same power crisis prevails year after year and the successive governments are unable to deal with the crisis at hand?
Well, you're right that this is a persisting problem in India, though the governments of the day over the last 2.5 decades or 3 decades, at least in my personal experience, 3 decades almost, have been earnestly trying to come to a viable solution. Well, power, first of all, as you all know, is a concurrent subject. It is handled in the state as well as the center, which means that it's not one government alone that is deciding what the policy should be. Coupled with that, it is a commodity which is very vital to our lives and one of the essential services. So it becomes a very convenient instrument for electoral politics also. And there have been many instances where the governments of the day have been kind of promising concessional power, no-cost power, which I think are essentially commercially unsound decisions, because power is an industrial commodity. It is controlled by commercial principles. You need capital to build structures, you need capital for it to sustain, and you need a certain degree of a market mechanism to be able to sustain that business in a viable form. Per capita consumption is very low, still very low in India, but the air conditioning needs added to that. The Indian railway system has been banking on freight charges to probably subsidize passenger transport, which is also adding to the cost of coal and ultimately power. You've been introducing a cess also on coal for many years now. So all this is contributing to the cost of power. Cost of power and cost of power for generation, cost of power to the consumer. And the financial health of the distribution companies has not been good at all. The debts have been mounting, and the generating companies who are at the virtually end of the chain of collection from the public. First, the distribution company collects, gives to transmission and to the companies, and then on to the coal companies. This cycle has been, I think, very deeply strained and stretched. And the structure of taxation has to be such that energy efficient goods are taxed less. Energy efficient buildings are taxed less, so that you somehow have a state policy of encouraging reduction in demand, so that ultimately you have to produce less energy, reduce the energy bills, and reduce global warming.
Okay.
It's an ongoing exercise, and I only hope that we come out victorious.
Are the present efforts that have been made by the government to tackle the coal crisis that is resulting in the power shortage, do you think they are enough? Do you think they are sufficient?
I think there are two aspects to it. One is the coal mining. The coal ministry has claimed that a few days back they had 77 million tons or above 70 million tons coal availability. And apparently some coal was lying at sidings which could be transported. The railways, which is the major carrier, has already shut down some passenger trains so that ostensibly to clear the route for coal to be carried. That I see is certainly a step in the right direction to meet the kind of emergency that has emerged. But I think we will need to supply more coal to the stations at pit heads and maybe use the transmission system to send this power, because it will be cheaper, it will be lesser strain on the transportation system, as well as probably reduce the cost. Coal shortage can come down, can again emerge if the coal mines get flooded and they do not have enough stocks to send around. Consumer will also have to try and reduce his consumption this period to the extent possible. When the sun rises early in a country like ours, why shouldn't we begin the day at 7 or even earlier? So that kind of thing, we need to reduce our load. That is, come back to the point of load management, demand side management, whether through efficiency or through timings or your activity levels coinciding with trying to reduce the electricity load on the system.
But you did speak about renewable energy, wind, solar, and tidal energy. Do you think tapping into renewable energy sources is the lasting solution to this crisis? And if yes, then is the government doing enough for it?
Yes, I think the government, we have to bank more on renewables in times to come to cut down on emissions. And when there's a concern of global warming, which has been scientifically shown to be a threat, we will certainly need to, as I mentioned earlier, build on nuclear as a baseload power much more substantially. We will need to look at other sources of energy, substituting one with the other, which is more benign in not only one sphere, lighting, maybe in other uses. Then you see using solar as a heating source directly rather than through electricity to the extent possible. So the overall energy management has to be handled frugally.
What can the governments do beforehand? This year is done and dusted. Before the next year, before the summer, what can the governments do beforehand to ensure that the crisis doesn't prevail before it's actually on our head?
See, there are certain norms which have been laid out. Wherever possible, the norms could be more realistic. And we should try and adhere to those norms of stocking, of payment of your dues, and also of performance and maintenance. We've got a wake-up call. If we repeatedly keep sleeping, in spite of the alarms ringing by our bedside, we cannot dab it down and still live easy. These are all warnings. We've got to reduce our consumption. We've got to introduce discipline, whether financial or working discipline. And we've got to live within our means. But progress. What I'm not saying is that we should stall progress. Yes, we should progress, but we should progress with some degree of responsibility and prudence. That is what I think we should do. And there is transparency helps in our system. And the different, I should say, the organs of the whole apparatus should not operate in a situation of denial. Yes, there is a problem. Let us acknowledge it and fight it.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. For more such interviews and videos, log on to thefederal.com.